to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend picks. You know, there's a lot of boxing going on this weekend, a lot of boxing. And we're going to start off with the semifinal in the World Boxing Super Series in the Cruiserweight division. First up, we've got the fight between Andrew Tabiti and Yuniel El Queo Doctor Dorticos. The winner of this fight will advance into the final to square off against the winner of Breidis versus Glowacki, which will be for both the WBC and WBO Cruiserweight titles. And we'll talk about that fight a little later on. For now, let's look at this matchup. I'd say that, respectively, the edge and power would obviously have to go to Yuniel Dorticos. That if any one of these two guys is some kind of an explosive puncher, it would be Yuniel. And that much is obvious. That's his signature, that's what he's known for, and that's what he's good at. Ow! But styles, as we all know, make fights. And there's more going on here than just who's the bigger puncher. You know, this is the sport of boxing. Different fights, different fighters, and their styles have a big effect over the overall aesthetic of a fight. And it being that, you know, Yuniel is known as a knockout puncher. He's known as a heavy hitter. If you and I know that, and we're sitting here at home, then it's a safe bet that Andrew Tabiti and his team are just as aware of this and mean to work around it. Don't play into this guy's power.
Don't do it.
Rather, you offset it. And this is something that I think Andrew Tabiti can and will do. You know, Andrew Tabiti's style, given the weight class that he fights in, you know, this is a weight class full of punchers. Dorticos is a puncher. Kudrajov is a puncher. Maris Breidis, he's cerebral, but he's also a puncher. Given the weight class that Andrew Tabiti fights in, he's actually one of the more cerebral fighters in that entire division. I mean, this is a thinking man's fighter. This is not a gunslinger. This guy is not a Gatling gun. He does his best to work as a sharpshooter, working off the counter, picking his spots, slowing down a fight, and taking his time. That's the kind of fighter that he is, and I know that this doesn't always make for the most entertaining kind of fighter or the most entertaining kind of fight, but it's the overall effectiveness of this that we're trying to gauge. Can this kind of a style offset the explosive power of Yuniel Dorticos? And I dare say yes. I dare say that Andrew Tabiti has what it takes to slow this fight down enough and drag it on long enough to where Yuniel's gas tank issues may come into play and he may start to fade. Because if any one of these guys it's a puncher, it's Dorticos. So in that way, it's more likely than not that Yuniel Dorticos is going to be the aggressor, but he may also be the guy who burns through his energy reserves, blows his load before Andrew Tabiti, who may just be the fresher guy late into the fight. And that's the thing. I do think this fight is going to go the distance. I do think it's going to go to the scorecards. Because Tabiti, you know, he's a good fighter. He's a good, solid guy. He's undefeated. He's stepping up in competition. But for all his virtues, he's not a knockout puncher. That's not his forte. It's not that he can't do it. It's not that he doesn't have respectable power. It's just that that's not what he's known for. And he doesn't win these fights behind concussive power. It's his boxing that wins him these fights. I'm of the opinion that given Dorticos' long reach, this is a guy with a big punch, big reach. He's got to get full extension off his punches to generate that knockout power. And I'm of the opinion that because he's got to get full extension, what we're going to see from Tabiti is we're going to see Tabiti trying to fight a close quarters kind of fight to where Yuniel can't get full extension off his punches to generate that power. That Tabiti may play him close to the chest, do what he's got to do mid-range to inside. And if, Dorticos is getting a little bit too antsy, this guy's getting a little bit too aggressive, Tabiti won't hesitate to tie that guy up. I know there are a lot of boxing fans that if there's one thing they hate, it's excessive clinching. We saw a lot of clinching in Tabiti's last fight with Pfeiffer. It was just a scrappy fight. These guys are doing a lot of wrestling. And while a lot of fans don't really care for that kind of a fight, at the end of the day, it is something a fighter can resort to offset a power guy. Tie the guy up, dive into a clinch, wrestle with the guy, have him burn his energy reserves, have him burn through them that way. So mid to late, the guy starts to fade. Suddenly, his punches aren't as snappy. Suddenly, this guy's defense is compromised as a result of exhaustion from constant wrestling and constant clinching. And I think that we may see something like that here in this fight between Tabiti and Dorticos. I'm of the opinion that Tabiti is going to try to smother Yuniel Dorticos' work to offset his power. And he's gonna do this mid-range to inside, because from the outside, well, that just so happens to be the danger zone if you're fighting Dorticos. That just so happens to be where he can get full extension off his punches to generate that one-hitter quitter power. In regards to Dorticos, he's definitely got elite level power, the kind of power that could end a fight very abruptly, you know? But as dangerous as that power is, you know, Dorticos might have world-class power, but he's not the most malleable fighter. He's not the most adaptable. Gassiev put that on full display when he powered through Dorticos' trademark 1-2 to close the gap on him and land compact hooks from mid-range to inside, where Dorticos can't generate that same power. I'm of the opinion that Tabiti and his handlers, they're aware of this, they know this, and while they may not have the same kind of punch that Gassiev had, that is where they intend to fight the fight. Mid-range to inside, where Dorticos' power isn't quite what it is when he can get full extension off his punch. Dorticos is a good fighter, they're both good fighters, but in the realm of stratagem, in the realm of being malleable, being adaptable, different varieties of combinations, I would have to say that in spite of Dorticos' world-class power, he doesn't necessarily have world-class skill. You know, he'll close the gap on a guy firing the 1-2, the trademark 1-2, with the occasional jab downstairs as he's coming forward, but if you close the gap on this guy, you get mid-range to inside on this guy, you fight him in the pocket, his limitations are in full view. And I think Tabiti's got what it takes to, you know, roll punches off the shoulder, slip and slide his way into position to where he can land clean counter shots safely, maybe string together a 2 to 3 punch combination and tie the guy up thereafter. Frustrate the guy. And I think he's going to try to do this tomorrow. So I'm of the opinion that, you know, it's a close fight. I mean, a lot could happen when you're fighting the kind of fighter that has Dorticos' power. A lot of things can happen, you know? Maybe Tabiti's doing good, he gets fucking smoked. Who knows? But I'm of the opinion that if we're gonna pick a pony in the show, then the pony I'm gonna pick is Andrew Tabiti. I'm gonna pick Andrew Tabiti to win a points decision against Yuniel Dorticos. Next up is the title fight, the cruiserweight title fight for what are the WBC and WBO titles in regards to Krzysztof Glowacki, the new WBO champion, awarded champion without a contest, by the way, but that's neither here nor there. Krzysztof Glowacki and former WBC champion Mairis Breidis. And this is a fight that's tough to call. I mean, this thing could be, you know, this thing could really end up being very, very hard to score, because in the case of Krzysztof Glowacki and Mairis Breidis, neither one of these guys is some come-forward plotter or some one-dimensional kind of guy trying to win the fight by strength of arms. The both of these guys are cerebral fighters. They don't go about winning a fight in a one-dimensional way. They both use the boxing. You look at Krzysztof Glowacki, who is a southpaw, quality straight left hand, some counter-punching ability. In turn, you look at Mairis Breidis, who's definitely a puncher, definitely a world-level puncher, but he is not limited to that. This guy also has his defensive and offensive virtues, a balance of the two. You know what they say in the sport of boxing, you're only as good as your last fight, and you think about both of these two guys' last fights. I'd say that the both of them were in very competitive situations in their last outings. Mairis Breidis with Noel Gavor, you know, that was a very competitive fight. The height, the aggressiveness, and some of the roughhouse tactics of Noel Gavor seemed to have flustered, seemed to have troubled Mairis Breidis in what I thought was a very competitive fight. In turn, you look at Krzysztof Glowacki's fight with Maxim, and you know, that's a fight that was an even fight, because on one end, you've got Krzysztof Glowacki, who's working off the counter, but at the same time, that does give off the appearance that Maxim was the busier, more aggressive guy in the fight, that Maxim was going for it.
Stone punches.
And Glowacki wasn't always obliging him because he was looking to land the cleaner, clearer shots by way of counter shots. But in that way, you're letting the other guy set the tempo of the fight. You think about how both Mairis Breidis and Krzysztof Glowacki were in competitive fights respective of each other, and what they bring to the table ahead of a fight between each other, against each other.
It's crapshoot.
And I think it has all the potential for a fight that is going to be very difficult to score. You know that both of these guys between each other, they really have fought some of the most formidable guys in the entire cruiserweight division, and yet neither one of them has ever been stopped. Krzysztof Glowacki has never been stopped. Briedis has never been stopped. This is a testament to how both of these guys are cerebral fighters, and ahead of a fight with each other, they may end up giving each other a lot of respect. They may end up giving each other's punching power a lot of respect.
Round by round.
And that makes for a fight that could very well go to the cards. I'll tell you the truth that this fight here has the potential to be an evenly fought fight where the rounds are hard to score. But given where the fight is taking place, the fact that the fight itself is in Breidis' backyard, I'll tell you that that gives him a slight edge. It gives him home field advantage. And there really is something to be said about that. That, you know, in a fight where some or many of the rounds, they may end up being hard to score, rounds that are so close that they could swing either way, is it far-fetched to say that in a situation like that, they may swing Breidis' way because they're in his backyard? I mean, in a close, competitive fight, in a fight that has the potential to have the kinds of rounds where you're not quite sure who nicked it, in a fight like that, is it far-fetched to say that they might give those rounds to Breidis, given where the fight is taking place? Look, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a slight at the fighters. It's not. It's just that there is something to be said about home field advantage, and this fight in particular, it does have, you know, there is a high probability that it's close, that it's competitive, that it's hard to score, and it's for that reason that I'm leaning towards Breidis to nick a close points decision. I don't think either one of these guys is going to get slept by the other. I think they're going to give each other a lot of respect. But with those things in mind, when it goes to the cards, I think that it might swing Breidis' way. So I'm going to go with Breidis to become the WBO and WBC champion tomorrow in the semifinal of the World Boxing Super Series. And next up is Jesse Hart's light heavyweight debut against none other than Sullivan Barrera on the undercard for the Tyson Fury versus Tom Schwartz heavyweight fight featured on ESPN. And just in regards to Jesse Hart versus Sullivan Barrera, let me tell you something. Let me tell you one fucking thing, okay? Some fights have so many variables, so many intangibles, that they're almost too close to call. You look at Jesse Hart, everything he's done so far, seems like a solid enough fighter, but his body of work as a super middleweight is not head and shoulders above anything that Sullivan Barrera has done at light heavyweight. If anything, Sullivan Barrera, respective of Jesse Hart, has faced more top contenders and more elite fighters in his weight class than Jesse Hart has in his. I mean, really think about it for a second. You know, the biggest fights against the most elite guys, or elite guy,
I should say,
that Jesse Hart has had in recent memory are two fights with Zurdo Ramirez. In the first fight, he took a very minimalist approach to what was his world title opportunity. You know, he just did a lot of moving, a lot of surviving. It wasn't a fight where he was trying to impose his will on what was the reigning champion. He gets a second crack at the same guy. And, you know, once again, it's a competitive fight, but Zurdo Ramirez actually hurt his arm or his elbow or something was going on in that fight after the midpoint, I believe it was. And this was Jesse Hart's opportunity to once again impose his will on the reigning champion. And he still came up short. I'm not telling you those fights weren't competitive. What I'm telling you is, in spite of all of that, that's the most elite guy that you fought. Zurdo Ramirez, a mid-range to inside fighter who's a hooker, who's very aggressive. Whereas now, you're at light heavyweight, you're facing a guy with a more malleable skill set who is obviously more experienced than you are at this weight, and respectively, has had more success against top contenders in his weight class than you've had in yours. I want you guys to pay attention to something. You know, both Jesse Hart and Sullivan Barrera have 2 professional losses on their records. Jesse Hart's 2 losses are to the same guy, Zurdo Ramirez, world title opportunities. In turn, Sullivan Barrera's 2 losses, one came at the hands of Andre Ward some time ago, and the other was to the WBA, the current reigning WBA champion, Dimitri Bivol. You look at that, both of these guys, they've only lost 2 fights. But then you think about who they've beaten. You know, when I look at Jesse Hart's resume, what he's done in the super middleweight division, his body of work in that weight class, you don't see a whole lot of substance there. Whereas in the case of Sullivan Barrera, you know, he's got a win over Felix Valera, Shawnee Monaghan, Joe Smith Jr., who's a massive puncher. He actually broke Joe Smith Jr.'s jaw. He picked himself up off the canvas in that fight. He picked himself up off the canvas, broke that guy's jaw, and won the fight. He also gave Vyacheslav Shabransky his first professional loss. He's been in there with an experienced vet in Jeff Lacey. Essentially what I'm getting at is that Sullivan Barrera's body of work as a light heavyweight is more extensive than Jesse Hart's body of work as a super middleweight. So now that Jesse is moving up into the light heavyweight division against this opponent, it's very hard to conjure any kind of confidence that Jesse Hart can come out on top in this fight. You know that Jesse Hart's saying he wants to go in there, he wants to knock out Sullivan Barrera. He wants to knock the guy out. I think about that, and he'd be making a statement. I mean, it really would be a statement if he were able to knock out Sullivan Barrera. But those things in mind, you know, Jesse Hart wasn't a huge puncher at super middleweight. So what are the odds that he's going to be a huge puncher at light heavyweight? You know, you think about who Sullivan Barrera has been in there with. He actually has been in there with a really concussive puncher in Joe Smith Jr., and Joe Smith Jr. didn't stop him. You think about the Dimitri Bivol fight, that Bivol had to really punish Sullivan Barrera before scoring that 12th round TKO stoppage. You know, and that was late in the fight. He really had to punish the guy for that to happen. And then you look at Jesse Hart, who took a minimalist approach in the first Zurdo Ramirez fight. He had a golden opportunity to impose his will on him in the second fight, and he still came up short. And I don't see this thing ending in a knockout. I just don't see it. That is, I don't see this thing ending in a knockout victory for Jesse Hart. I mean, anything's possible, but we're not assessing whether or not anything's possible. We're trying to make an assessment on what is likelier than not. We then look at the styles of the fighters to see if we can gain any insight to forecast the outcome based on the styles. And both of these guys are well-rounded boxers. I'd say that right about now, Jesse Hart does have the snappier, slightly faster punches than Sullivan Barrera. But, you know, Sullivan Barrera has it well within his abilities to fight a very tight, defensively responsible fight.
That's true.
The thing about Sullivan is it takes him a couple of rounds to really get his juices going, and these are rounds that Jesse Hart could pick up early in the fight. That, you know, sometimes it takes Sullivan 2-3 rounds to find his rhythm. So I'll put it to you this way. I'm not beaming with confidence in regards to either of these two fighters. But if we're going to take a logical approach, logic would dictate that Sullivan Barrera is more experienced at the weight. He's faced more elite level fighters, more top 10 guys in his weight class than Jesse Hart has faced in his. And that experience, in junction with Jesse Hart being new to the weight class, that would dictate, from a purely logical approach, that Sullivan Barrera has a slight edge here. I'm not beaming with confidence, but I'm going to go ahead and pick Sullivan Barrera to win by way of a points decision in what could be a closely fought fight. Now, if you're waiting for my thoughts on the Tyson Fury versus Tom Schwartz heavyweight fight, I've already covered that in a previous video, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box.